The moment the cup tipped, time seemed to slow. Scalding coffee cascaded down Evelyn Thompson's chest, staining her pale blue sweater as steam rose between her trembling hands. The man who had done it, Officer Derek Harlan, stood above her, his uniform sharp, his eyes cold with contempt. "Maybe now you'll learn to move when spoken to," he muttered, his voice dripping with venom. The cafe fell silent. The hiss of the espresso machine was the only sound. Customers froze, some staring in disbelief, others turning away in cowardice. Evelyn didn't scream. She didn't even move. Her hands, aged yet steady, rested on the table, and her gaze lifted to meet his. It was the kind of look that pierced through generations of cruelty, quiet, unflinching, filled with a dignity Derek could never understand. Before we go deeper into this story, take a moment to tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and if you believe in justice, hit that like button. Now, let's begin. Evelyn Thompson was 68 years old, a retired teacher, and a widow who'd spent most mornings at the same corner seat of the Harbor Brew Cafe. She liked her coffee simple, black, no sugar, and she liked her silence. That morning, she wore her favorite blue sweater and her silver brooch shaped like a dove, a gift from her late husband. She had no idea that within minutes, her quiet routine would become the spark of a nationwide reckoning. Derek Harlan walked in at 8:37 a.m., already irritated. He was off duty but still wore his uniform, craving recognition and control. His arrogance filled the small cafe before he even spoke. When he spotted Evelyn sitting by the window, the only empty seat in sight, he scowled. "Hey," he barked. "You're in my spot." Evelyn didn't look up. She was marking a page in her worn notebook with a smile that carried decades of patience. "There are other seats." "Officer," she said softly. That tone, calm, assured, only fueled his rage. Derek wasn't new to anger. He'd carried it for years, fed by envy and unchecked power. Records later revealed 3 internal complaints against him, each dismissed by Sergeant Victor Klein. He had grown used to getting away with it. And that morning, when a black woman refused to submit to his command, his pride took over. "Lady." "I said move," he snarled, stepping closer. The cafe manager looked up, hesitated, then pretended to wipe the counter. No one dared intervene. Derek grabbed Evelyn's cup from the table, held it over her chest, and sneered. "You people never learn respect." Then, with deliberate cruelty, he poured the boiling coffee straight down. The gasp that followed was sharp, collective, almost musical in its horror. Evelyn's sweater darkened, her skin reddened, but she didn't flinch. She simply looked at him and whispered. "My mother faced worse. So did I, in the corner." 17-year-old Mia Rodriguez clutched her phone, recording every second. She had come for a morning latte before school, unaware she'd capture history. Her father, an immigrant construction worker, had always told her, "When injustice walks in, you don't look away." Her hands shook, but she kept filming as Derek stormed off, smirking, the moment he pushed open the glass door. Sunlight hit the side of his badge, its reflection glinting like guilt itself. Mia sent the video to 3 friends. By 9:45 a.m., it had reached every corner of Baltimore. By noon, it was on every local news broadcast. Within 4 hours, it hit 4.5 million views. The image of a uniformed officer pouring coffee on an elderly black woman became the symbol of everything wrong with the city. Reporters swarmed Harbor Brew, protesters gathered at the corner of Pratt and Light Streets. And Evelyn? She sat in her chair at home, bandaged but calm, sipping cold tea as her neighbor. Mrs. Clara Bennett whispered, "You did nothing wrong." Evelyn, nothing at all. Meanwhile, in the skies above Virginia, an FBI jet cut through the clouds. Director Jamal Thompson sat by the window, his laptop open, when the alert popped up. He clicked without hesitation. The first thing he saw was his mother's face, burned, humiliated, yet composed. The world saw an elderly black woman enduring hate. He saw his mother. For a moment, silence filled the cabin. Then, with steady breath, he called Lieutenant Sarah Jenkins. "Sarah," he said quietly, his tone like stone breaking. "Pull every record tied to the Baltimore Police Department, starting with Officer Derek Harlan." "Understood," she replied. "What's going on, sir?" He stared at the still image frozen on his screen. The moment coffee struck his mother's chest. "My mother," he said, his voice tightening. "They poured coffee on my mother. Within minutes, a federal order was issued. By the time his plane touched down at BWI Airport, the Bureau's Civil Rights Division was already mobilized, back at the Baltimore Police Department." Derek smirked as he scrolled through comments online. He thought it would blow over, like every other complaint. He had no idea who Evelyn Thompson really was. His superior, Sergeant Victor Klein, called him in. "Lay low," Victor warned. "I'll handle the fallout." Victor had handled many things before: reports, witnesses, even cases that should have ended his career. But this time, the fire was different. It wasn't just another scandal, it was personal to someone powerful. By evening, the footage aired on CNN, narrated by journalist Rebecca Ford. A disturbing act of cruelty in a Baltimore cafe has sparked outrage across the nation. She said, "The victim, identified as 68-year-old Evelyn Thompson, remains silent, but the public is not." As the broadcast ended, Evelyn's phone rang. "Mama." Jamal's voice came through, steady but low. "Are you hurt?" "Not much," she answered. "It's only skin." "Jamal, I've seen worse burns in Selma." He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of memory. "This isn't Selma. Mama, this is my city now, and they'll regret touching you." That night, Jamal arrived at her door. No cameras, no entourage. Just a son standing before his mother. The air between them carried 50 years of struggle, sacrifice, and pride. Evelyn reached out, touching his cheek. "You have your father's eyes," she said softly, "and his fire. Use it." Jamal nodded, stepping back toward his car. The flashing lights from nearby reporters reflected on his face, but his voice remained calm as he spoke to Sarah Jenkins over the phone. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., we start the investigation. No delays. I want names, files, everything. They'll pay for this." Inside the cafe, the spilled coffee had already been wiped away, but something irreversible had begun. A movement, a reckoning. And though Evelyn Thompson had chosen silence that morning, her quiet dignity had spoken louder than any protest chant ever could. By sunrise the next day, the entire city of Baltimore was awake with fury. News anchors replayed the footage every hour, each frame igniting fresh waves of disbelief and anger. At first, local stations covered it as another incident of police misconduct. But by noon, it had become something far larger, a national story about dignity, silence, and power. Evelyn Thompson's face appeared on every screen, her quiet composure contrasting sharply with Derek Harlan's arrogance. Reporters gathered outside Harbor Brew Cafe, calling it the heart of America's moral storm. In a small apartment above Lombard Street, 17-year-old Mia Rodriguez barely slept. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Calls, messages, reporters begging for interviews. She hadn't meant to start a movement. She only wanted people to see what she saw. Her father told her, "Mija, you did right. The world needs to see truth." But the truth came with fear. Around 8 a.m., she received an anonymous call. A man's voice, cold and controlled, said, "Take that video down, or you'll regret it." She froze. The voice belonged to Derek Harlan. shaken. She called the number Jamal Thompson had given her the night before. Within minutes, a black SUV pulled up outside. Inside was Officer Liam Patel, a young Indian-American cop Jamal trusted. "You're safe now," Liam told her, glancing at the tinted windows. "Director Thompson asked me to watch over you. You did something brave. Don't let fear steal that from you." Meanwhile, inside FBI temporary headquarters at the Baltimore field office, Jamal sat across from Lieutenant Sarah Jenkins. "Pull every file connected to Sergeant Victor Klein," he ordered. "Every complaint, every internal memo." Sarah nodded, sliding a folder across the table. "Sir, it's bad. We found over 300 unresolved complaints in the last 12 years, mostly racial bias, some brutality, all signed off by Klein." Jamal's jaw tightened. "And Derek? 3 formal complaints, 5 verbal warnings, all dismissed. Klein's signatures again." He leaned back, silent for a moment, then his voice steadied. "They covered for each other. They always do. Not this time." At noon, Jamal drove to his mother's house in West Baltimore. Evelyn was sitting in her armchair, her sweater replaced with a shawl Clara Bennett had knit years ago. "They keep calling me," she said, gesturing to the phone, reporters, churches, even city council members. "I told them I'll speak when the time's right." Jamal sat beside her, his voice softer now. "You shouldn't have to speak. Mama, I'll handle it." But Evelyn shook her head. "No, son, I was silent long enough. In the 60s, I marched with your father. We were beaten, spat on, and told we were nothing. But silence isn't peace. It's endurance. Now, I'll speak again." That evening, Evelyn's brief statement aired on television. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "What happened to me is nothing new," she said. "But what matters is what happens next." Her poise struck a chord across the nation. CNN anchor Rebecca Ford described her as the quiet storm Baltimore didn't know it needed. Rebecca, who lost her brother to police violence years earlier, vowed to cover the story personally. Outside the Baltimore Police Department, a crowd of over 250 people gathered. Dr. Marcus Hale, a retired doctor turned activist, stood on the steps holding a megaphone. His voice boomed through the streets. "We are not here for revenge. We are here for respect," the crowd roared, their signs reading "Justice for Evelyn" and "End Police Cruelty." The chants echoed for blocks, drawing city attention inside City Hall. Mayor Alicia Rivera paced her office. She'd served for 5 years, often walking the tightrope between reform and politics. Her chief of staff whispered, "Madam Mayor, Director Thompson's online too." She sighed. Picking up the phone, "Jamal," she began carefully, "the situation's complicated. The police union—" "I'm not here to talk unions," Jamal interrupted. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Your city has a cancer, and I intend to remove it. Cooperate, or the feds take over." Rivera hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Do what you have to do. Just keep my people safe." By late afternoon, Jamal convened a private meeting in an old diner on Charles Street. Around the table sat Mia Rodriguez, Clara Bennett, and 2 witnesses from the cafe who had come forward. The atmosphere was tense but purposeful. Jamal's eyes moved from one face to the next. "I know this isn't easy," he said, "but your testimonies will help us expose more than one bad officer. This is about cleaning an entire system." Mia's voice trembled. "He called me this morning. Derek. He threatened me." Jamal leaned forward. "He won't hurt you. You have my word." Across town, Derek Harlan sat in his apartment, drinking heavily. His wife, Emily, scrolled through the comments flooding social media. "You've destroyed us." "Derek," she said bitterly, "our son saw the video." He cried. Derek slammed the table. "I did nothing wrong. She provoked me." But even he didn't believe it anymore. At 6 p.m., Jamal returned to headquarters. Sarah met him with fresh findings. "Sir, we traced an old case from 18 years ago. Victor Klein signed off on the death report of an officer named Samuel Thompson." Jamal froze. "My father." She nodded gently. "It wasn't an accident. There's evidence it was covered up. Your father's partner filed a complaint. It vanished. For a long moment." Jamal said nothing, his hands clenched on the desk, eyes distant with memory. "So it comes full circle," he murmured. "The same man who buried my father's case now protects the man who assaulted my mother that night." Jamal visited Evelyn again. She was watching the evening news, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the screen. "They said your protest reached the governor's office." She said, "Marcus Hale's leading tomorrow's march. You should go." "I will," he replied, sitting beside her. "But I need to prepare. Tomorrow, we're pulling Klein's entire division under federal review." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Your father would be proud. But remember, justice isn't vengeance. It's discipline." He looked at her, emotion flickering beneath his calm. "I know, Mama. But discipline doesn't mean mercy." Outside, Baltimore's skyline flickered with red and blue lights, sirens, helicopters, and the noise of unrest. But inside Evelyn's modest home, there was peace, a quiet before the storm. By dawn, local papers carried bold headlines: FBI director's mother attacked by officer, federal probe launched, CNN broadcast live from City Hall as Rebecca Ford narrated the story. Protesters filled the streets, their chants echoing through the harbor district. Jamal watched from his office window, determination in his eyes. "This isn't just about my mother," he said to Sarah. "It's about every voice silenced by fear." Sarah nodded. "Then let's make it count," as the crowd grew. Evelyn's words from the night before lingered in his mind, words that would guide every step of the battle ahead. "My silence was strength, but you must speak." And that day, Jamal Thompson spoke with action. By noon, 9 officers were placed under federal suspension. Files once hidden were dragged into daylight. The storm had begun, and this time, it would not be silenced. The city of Baltimore felt like it was holding its breath. Every news outlet, every living room conversation revolved around one question: would justice finally come? Inside the Baltimore field office, the hum of printers and footsteps filled the air as Jamal Thompson stood before his team, eyes sharp, voice unwavering. "We're not here to make headlines," he said firmly. "We're here to clean a department that's been rotting for years." The walls were lined with stacks of case files, each one a silent cry for justice ignored by the same corrupt men he was now determined to expose. By 10 a.m., the federal probe was officially underway. Jamal authorized a full audit of the Baltimore Police Department's Conduct Division. His order was simple: review every complaint under Victor Klein's supervision since 2013. When Sarah Jenkins returned with the early data, even she looked shaken. "Sir," she said quietly, 350 unresolved complaints, 9 officers directly implicated in brutality and cover-ups. Jamal exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "Suspend them. All 9. Effective immediately." The command cut through the room like a blade, within the hour. The names were sent to the mayor's office. Every suspended officer received a federal notice signed personally by Jamal Thompson. Meanwhile, the streets outside burned with anger and hope. Protesters had grown from a few hundred to over 1,000. At the front stood Dr. Marcus Hale, his deep voice booming through the crowd. "We've waited too long for change. Today we demand it." Behind him, handmade signs rose high. "Justice for Evelyn. End the silence. Accountability now." Among the faces was Sophia Thompson, Jamal's daughter. She had traveled from Georgetown Law to stand with the people. Her voice was strong, her spirit her father's mirror. "They can't ignore us anymore," she shouted. Cameras caught her passion. By evening, her words were replayed on national news. Inside the department, not everyone welcomed the change. Sergeant Victor Klein watched the coverage from his office, rage simmering beneath his calm exterior. For years, he had buried complaints, shredded reports, and silenced witnesses, all to protect himself and his men. But now, his empire was crumbling. He slammed the remote on his desk and barked, "Get me Harlan!" Minutes later, Derek Harlan entered, pale and sweating. "Sir, they're coming after me," he stammered. "I'm getting threats. My wife's leaving." Victor cut him off. "You brought this on yourself. You think the Bureau would be here if you hadn't been so stupid?" Derek swallowed hard, the reality sinking in. "What do I do now?" Victor glared at him. "Keep quiet. If they find out what we've done, you're finished, and so am I." But one man inside the department had already made his choice. Officer Liam Patel, quiet and meticulous, sat at his desk copying files onto an encrypted drive. He'd seen too much, witnessed Derek's cruelty, Victor's lies, and the despair of victims who never got justice. He'd joined the force to protect people, not to watch corruption thrive. That afternoon, he called Sarah Jenkins from an untraceable number. "Tell Director Thompson I have what he's looking for," Liam said softly. "But if Victor finds out, I won't make it out alive." Sarah's voice steadied. "Meet us tonight, 8 p.m., at the diner on Charles Street, at dusk." Liam left the precinct, clutching his bag, but as he reached his car, headlights flashed behind him. A black SUV pulled up, and Victor stepped out, going somewhere. "Patel?" His tone was calm, too calm. Liam froze, just heading home. "Sir?" Victor smiled coldly. "Home can wait." What followed was a tense pursuit through narrow city streets. Liam's car weaved through traffic, tires screeching as he tried to escape. Victor's SUV followed close behind, finally. Liam turned into a crowded market, abandoning his car and vanishing into the alleys. His phone buzzed. Sarah's message, "We've got you. Keep moving." That night, Jamal met with Liam in a safe house on the edge of the city. The young officer handed over the drive. "It's all there, sir," he said, his voice shaking. "Emails, payment records, falsified reports, everything Klein's been hiding." Jamal took the drive carefully, his expression unreadable. "You've done something brave. Officer Patel, you just helped change the future of this department." Liam nodded, relief mixing with fear. "Just promise me it'll matter." Jamal placed a hand on his shoulder. "It already does," back at Evelyn's home. Clara Bennett sat with her, both watching the protests on TV. Evelyn's eyes glistened, not from pain, but from pride. "They're fighting for something real," she whispered. Clara smiled faintly. "You started this, Evelyn. That quiet strength of yours. It woke the whole city." Evelyn shook her head. "It wasn't me. It was justice, finally demanding to be heard, across town." Jamal confronted Victor in his office. He laid the evidence on the desk, a single flash drive gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "You've been hiding behind badges and paperwork for 20 years, Jamal said coldly. "You buried complaints, falsified reports, and even covered up my father's death." Victor's face drained of color. "Your father's case was closed decades ago. You can't." Jamal slammed a file onto the desk. "Don't lie to me. I've seen the report you signed. You called it an accident, but he was shot by one of your men during a so-called raid, and you buried it, for the first time." Victor faltered. His voice trembled. It was complicated. Orders from above. Jamal leaned forward, his eyes burning with restrained fury. No, it was cowardice. That night, news broke of the suspensions. 9 officers, publicly named and shamed, were under investigation. The headlines read, FBI Director cracks down on corrupt Baltimore cops. The protests swelled to 1,500 people. Mayor Rivera, once hesitant, stood beside Jamal at a press conference, declaring her full support. The people of Baltimore deserve justice, she said, and we will see it through. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded forward, and Jamal spoke clearly, his tone both measured and firm. No one is above the law, not even those who enforce it. Watching from her living room, Evelyn smiled faintly. You sound just like your father, she murmured. Jamal's voice echoed across the city that night, a promise etched in every heart listening. This time, justice would not fade into silence. By the following week, Baltimore was no longer a city. It was a battlefield of voices. Thousands filled the streets, marching through downtown with chants that echoed off the old brick buildings. The number of protesters had swelled past 1,500, led by Dr. Marcus Hale, whose booming voice carried through the humid afternoon air. We are here for Evelyn Thompson, he roared through a megaphone, for every name buried under silence at the center of the crowd. Sophia Thompson walked beside him, holding a sign that read, Justice is not optional. Her hair was tied back, her face fierce with determination. Cameras surrounded her, reporters whispering about the daughter of the FBI director standing shoulder to shoulder with the people. Jamal watched from his office window high above the city, arms folded, expression grave. He admired Sophia's courage, but his heart was heavy with worry. She's putting herself at risk, he muttered. Sarah Jenkins stood nearby, reviewing reports. She's her father's daughter, she said softly. You raised her to stand up for what's right. Jamal nodded, but unease lingered in his chest. Yes, he replied, and now I have to protect her from the consequences of doing exactly that. Down below. The protests began peacefully, but it only took one match to spark chaos. A small group of provocateurs, secretly hired by Sergeant Victor Klein to discredit the movement, slipped into the crowd. They shouted inflammatory slogans, threw bottles, and ignited smoke flares. Within minutes, police sirens wailed, and officers in riot gear descended on the scene. Confusion erupted. Someone yelled, "They're attacking us!" Tear gas filled the air. Protesters scattered, coughing and crying, in the middle of it all. Sophia found herself shoved against a barricade as officers advanced. I'm unarmed, she shouted, holding up her hands, but before she could move, an officer grabbed her arm and slammed her to the ground. The moment was caught on live television. By the time Jamal saw the footage, his hands were shaking, not from fear, but fury. Get my daughter out of there, he ordered, within minutes. FBI vehicles rolled through the chaos. Sarah coordinated the extraction while Jamal called the mayor directly. Rivera, he said through clenched teeth. If your police harm another protester, I'll federalize your entire department by morning. There was a pause, then the mayor's trembling voice. Understood. I'll order the withdrawal. Sophia was released 2 hours later, bruised but unbroken, when Jamal arrived at the holding facility. She was already standing tall, defiant. I'm fine, she said, her voice hoarse. You told me to fight for justice. That's what I did. Jamal looked at her, torn between anger and pride. You could have been killed. So could she. Sophia shot back. Grandma sat there and did nothing wrong. You think I'll stay silent while they do it again? Her words cut deep. He turned away, running a hand over his face. You're your mother's daughter, he murmured, and your father's problem. That night, Victor Klein sat alone in his office. Surrounded by chaos he could no longer control. Every TV channel, every newspaper headline screamed his name, Sergeant under fire for cover-ups. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, muttering, They think they can take me down? A knock interrupted him. Derek Harlan entered, his uniform disheveled, his eyes sunken. "They're coming for me." "Vic," he said, voice cracking. The bureau called. "They've got evidence, witnesses, everything." Victor sneered. "You think I don't? I built this department. I've survived 5 commissioners. I'll survive this too." But deep down, fear gnawed at him. His walls were closing in, across town. Rebecca Ford sat in a dimly lit CNN studio preparing for her interview with Evelyn Thompson. The elderly woman had agreed to speak publicly for the first time since the attack. When the cameras rolled, Evelyn's voice was soft but steady. "I didn't raise my son to seek revenge," she began. "I raised him to seek truth. I've seen what hate can do. But I've also seen what courage can heal." The interviewer leaned forward. "Mrs. Thompson, what do you hope comes from this?" Evelyn's eyes glistened, her hands clasped gently. "Change. Not for me. For the next woman who sits quietly and prays she won't be noticed." That clip would travel farther than anyone expected. Within hours, it aired on national television, inspiring millions. Even hardened officers watching from home felt something shift. Meanwhile, Jamal's team worked through the night. Liam Patel's data had cracked open the department's darkest secrets: bribe ledgers, fake witness reports, hidden bank accounts. All trails pointed back to Victor Klein. Sarah laid the papers across the conference table. "It's enough to charge him with obstruction, fraud, and conspiracy," she said. Jamal leaned forward, scanning the documents. "Then do it," he ordered. "Get me a federal warrant before dawn." At 7 a.m., Jamal walked into the mayor's office with the warrant in hand. Mayor Rivera looked exhausted, her desk buried in papers and protest reports. "You're making enemies." "Jamal," she warned. "The union's threatening to strike. City Hall's in panic." Jamal met her gaze without hesitation. "Let them panic. Fear is the first sign of accountability." She sighed, finally nodding. "Do what you must. Just make it right." That afternoon, FBI agents stormed the Baltimore police headquarters. The press flooded the streets as Victor Klein was escorted out in handcuffs, his once proud uniform replaced by disbelief. Reporters shouted questions. He kept his head down. Jamal watched from a distance, his expression unreadable. When Victor passed by, their eyes met for the last time. "You'll regret this," Victor hissed. Jamal replied evenly. "No. Victor, you will. Back home." Derek Harlan sat on the floor of his living room, surrounded by silence. His wife had left. His badge had been suspended. He turned on the television just in time to see Victor's arrest broadcast live. "They got him," he whispered. His reflection stared back from the black screen. Broken, hollow, defeated. Moments later, he dialed his wife's number. "Emily. I'm sorry. I messed up." Her voice was distant, tired. "You didn't mess up. Derek, you destroyed everything." The call ended. That evening, Jamal held a press conference outside City Hall. Cameras flashed as he stepped up to the podium. The crowd fell silent. "Today," he began, "we took the first step toward restoring justice in Baltimore. No badge will ever protect corruption again. No silence will ever shield cruelty." His voice deepened. "Carrying across the plaza, I promise you, there will be no mercy for those who abuse their power." The crowd erupted in applause. Reporters shouted questions. But Jamal simply raised his hand. "This isn't about revenge," he said firmly. "It's about rebuilding trust, brick by brick." As the sun set over the harbor, Evelyn watched the speech from her porch, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You did it. Jamal," she whispered. "You finally did it." Clara Bennett sat beside her, smiling. "He's not done yet," she said softly. "This is just the beginning." That night, as the city slept under a blanket of uneasy peace, Jamal stood by his window overlooking the harbor lights. The reflection of his mother's strength and his daughter's courage flickered in his mind. Tomorrow would bring trials, press attacks, and political threats. But for now, he allowed himself one quiet thought, a vow whispered into the stillness. No more silence, ever again. The morning after Victor Klein's arrest, Baltimore awoke to a new kind of silence, the heavy, watchful quiet that comes after a storm, but before justice is fully secured. The headlines were everywhere. FBI director's crackdown uncovers 12 years of police corruption. The streets were calmer, yet the city's heartbeat pulsed with tension. For Jamal Thompson, there was no rest. He stood before the mirror in his temporary office, adjusting his tie with slow precision. Today, he would face the men responsible for his mother's humiliation, his father's death, and the system that had sheltered them both, down in the interrogation wing. Derek Harlan sat alone at a metal table. His hands trembled as he stared at the blank wall. The arrogance that once filled him was gone, stripped by public disgrace and his own unraveling conscience. When the door opened, Jamal entered with quiet authority. His dark suit contrasted sharply with the sterile white walls. He placed a folder on the table and sat across from Derek, his tone calm but edged with steel. "You know who I am," Jamal said. Derek nodded nervously. "Yes, sir." "Then you know why I'm here," Jamal continued. "This isn't about revenge. It's about truth." He opened the folder, sliding several photographs toward Derek. Evelyn's burned sweater, the cafe's surveillance stills, and Derek's disciplinary reports. You poured scalding coffee on a 68-year-old woman who said nothing to you. You mocked her, then left her in pain while you walked out smiling. Derek swallowed hard. "I made a mistake," he muttered. Jamal leaned forward. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice." His voice softened slightly, almost pitying. "Do you know who that woman is?" Derek hesitated, then whispered, "Yes, sir. Your mother." Jamal nodded slowly. "You touched my mother, and in doing so, you touched everything I stand for. You lose everything today." Derek's composure broke. He covered his face with his hands, tears streaming down his cheeks. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. She looked at me like I was nothing, like she knew me." Jamal studied him quietly. "She did know you, Derek. Not you personally, but the kind of man you chose to be, the one who hides fear behind a badge." He stood up, closing the folder. "You can help yourself by telling me everything about Klein's operation." Derek's voice cracked. "He told me he'd protect me, said he'd handled worse before." "And what did you do for that protection?" Jamal asked, after a long pause. Derek spoke softly. "I delivered envelopes, cash. He said it was department bonuses. But I knew it was bribes from local contractors and nightclub owners." Meanwhile, across the city, Victor Klein sat in a federal holding cell, staring at the concrete floor. His arrogance had dissolved into exhaustion. The sound of boots echoed down the corridor, and he looked up to see Sarah Jenkins and 2 federal agents approaching. "You'll be transported to the courthouse this afternoon," Sarah informed him. "Your lawyer's waiting." Victor smirked weakly. "Greg Simmons? He's useless without a loophole." Sarah's eyes were cold. There are no loopholes left. That afternoon, the courthouse overflowed with reporters and citizens. People lined the steps, holding signs that read, "Justice for Evelyn and Clean the System." Inside, Jamal sat behind the prosecution table, his posture firm but composed. Across the aisle, defense attorney Greg Simmons fidgeted beside his client. Victor wore a grim expression, his once commanding presence reduced to a weary man surrounded by evidence. The judge entered, gavel striking sharply. The court will now hear testimony in United States versus Victor Klein. The first witness was Jasmine Lee, her voice steady despite the emotion trembling beneath it. She recounted how her brother, a community volunteer, was wrongfully shot years earlier and how Victor had covered it up. "He told me to stop asking questions," she said through tears. "Said it was an accident. But my brother's name never appeared on the report. It was erased." The courtroom fell silent as Jamal rose. "Ms. Lee," he asked gently, "do you see the man who ordered that cover-up?" Her eyes fixed on Victor. "Yes," she whispered. "He's right there." Next came Officer Liam Patel, who described years of intimidation and corruption. Every time someone spoke up, they were transferred, demoted, or worse. He testified, "I stayed quiet for too long, but when I saw what happened to Mrs. Thompson, I couldn't anymore." Jamal nodded in approval. "You did the right thing." Officer Patel, Victor's lawyer, tried to discredit them, but the evidence was overwhelming. The ledgers Liam had uncovered connected Victor to bribery, falsified reports, and concealed deaths, including that of Samuel Thompson, Jamal's father. When the report was shown on the screen, the courtroom collectively gasped. "Sergeant Klein," Jamal said, turning to him, "do you deny signing this falsified death report?" Victor's face was pale. "Your father's death was an accident," he muttered. Jamal's tone hardened. "No, it was a murder you buried. You denied a family closure, and now you'll face the truth you ran from." As the day stretched on, Derek was brought in under guard. His testimony confirmed the extent of Klein's corruption. "He told me to keep quiet about everything." Derek confessed, said he'd make sure nothing touched me, but when the video went viral, he told me I was on my own. Victor glared at him from across the courtroom. "You coward," he hissed. Derek's voice broke. "No, sir, I'm just done lying." The emotional weight of the hearing was unbearable for some. Evelyn, seated quietly in the back row beside Clara Bennett, clutched her shawl. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of release. She whispered to Clara, "He's doing it. Clara, he's breaking the cycle." When the session ended, the judge ordered both defendants to remain in custody. The crowd erupted in murmurs of relief and applause. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca Ford reported live for CNN. "Today's hearing marks a turning point," she said. "For years, corruption and racism have infected this city's justice system. But under Director Thompson's leadership, the truth is finally seeing daylight." Later that evening, Jamal and Sophia sat together in his office. She placed a hand on his arm. "You did it," she said softly. "No," he replied, shaking his head. "We're just beginning. There are still 13 more officers under investigation." She smiled faintly. "You sound like Grandpa," he chuckled quietly. "Maybe I do, but I'll finish what he couldn't." At home, Evelyn waited for her son. When he arrived, she greeted him with her gentle smile. "You look tired," she said. Tired, but proud. He sat beside her, resting his hands on his knees. "We got them. Mama," Derek confessed. "Victor's going to prison." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Good. But remember, justice isn't a victory. It's a responsibility. You can't stop here." He met her gaze. "Understanding." "I won't," he promised. "We're establishing a civilian oversight board, independent of city control. Every complaint will be investigated publicly. No more shadows." Evelyn's eyes softened. "That's your father's spirit living through you." As the night deepened, Jamal stood by the window, the city lights flickering below like embers of a dying fire. He whispered quietly to himself, "For you, Dad, and for her." The wind outside carried distant echoes of chants, voices still calling for change, and for the first time in years, Jamal believed the city might finally be ready to listen. The courthouse was overflowing the morning the verdict came. Journalists packed the steps outside, cameras flashing against a sky heavy with gray clouds. Inside, every seat was filled. Activists, reporters, ordinary citizens, and families who had lost faith in justice long ago. Evelyn Thompson sat quietly in the front row, her silver brooch glinting beneath the courtroom lights. Next to her sat Clara Bennett, hands clasped in silent prayer. Jamal stood at the prosecution table, his face unreadable, but his heart steady. Months of investigation, countless nights without sleep, and every ounce of restraint he had left. All of it led to this day. The judge entered, his robe flowing as the room rose to its feet. The clerk read out the charges one by one: assault, obstruction of justice, bribery, falsification of reports, and civil rights violations. Then came the words everyone had waited to hear: Defendant Derek Harlan, guilty on all counts. The crowd gasped, then fell silent. Derek, once proud and smug, lowered his head. His hands trembled as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. For a brief moment, he turned toward Evelyn, his lips parted, as if searching for forgiveness. But her gaze was firm and distant. She had forgiven many things in her lifetime, but not this. Next came Victor Klein. His face was pale, his eyes sunken from weeks in custody. The judge continued, his voice calm but heavy with gravity. Sergeant Victor Klein, guilty of conspiracy, obstruction, and systemic corruption, sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Victor clenched his jaw but said nothing. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Some cheered, others cried quietly. For those who had suffered in silence for years, this was more than justice. It was vindication. As bailiffs escorted the men out, Jamal rose slowly. He had promised himself not to feel satisfaction, only resolve. But when he saw Derek glance back one last time, his expression hollow and broken, Jamal finally understood the true cost of hate. Derek had lost everything: his career, his family, his name, and Victor, the man who once controlled an entire department through fear and deceit, was now just another inmate number. Justice had stripped them of power, and in doing so, restored the dignity they stole from others. Outside, the crowd gathered, chanting Evelyn's name. Reporters swarmed Jamal as he exited the courthouse steps. Rebecca Ford from CNN pushed through the crowd. "Director Thompson, do you believe justice has been served?" she asked. Jamal paused, looking over the sea of faces. "Justice," he said slowly, "isn't a single verdict. It's the work that comes after. Today, we proved that no badge, no rank, no uniform is above the law. But our work isn't done." His voice carried over the noise, steady and solemn. The system failed too many for too long. Now, it must learn to heal. That afternoon, Jamal met with Mayor Alicia Rivera at City Hall. She looked weary but hopeful. "You've done what no one else could," she admitted. "The city owes you." Jamal shook his head. "No, Mayor. The city owes itself. This isn't about me, it's about building something better." He handed her a document, a detailed proposal for reform, a civilian oversight board. He explained, independent investigators, public transparency, mandatory body cam uploads, and a zero-tolerance policy for bias. Rivera scanned the pages, her eyes widening. "You've already written the whole policy?" Jamal smiled faintly. "I started the day after my mother was attacked." She leaned back in her chair, exhaling. "Then let's make it law." That evening, the City Council voted unanimously to approve the Baltimore Accountability Act. The reforms were sweeping. 13 officers dismissed, mandatory anti-bias training across all precincts, and a civilian board with full investigative powers. The city that had once buried truth now stood as a model of reform. The headlines read, "From Pain to Progress, Baltimore Begins Again." Evelyn watched the broadcast from her living room. Her bandages had long been removed, the scars faded but not forgotten. Clara sat beside her, a gentle smile spreading across her face. "He did it," Clara whispered. Evelyn nodded slowly. "No," she said softly. "We did it." Every voice that spoke, every heart that refused to give up. That's what justice looks like. Meanwhile, inside the federal penitentiary, Victor Klein's world had collapsed into a gray cell and a steel cot. The man who once commanded an army of officers now sat alone, haunted by memories of the men he destroyed and the city he corrupted. 2 years later, a heart attack ended his life quietly in his sleep. The news reached Jamal's office one rainy morning. He said nothing for a long time, then finally murmured, "Even the corrupt deserve mercy in death." Derek Harlan's fate was no kinder. Inside prison, he became a symbol of disgrace. Other inmates taunted him, guards ignored him, and his own son refused to visit. Letters to his estranged wife went unanswered by the time his 5-year sentence was halfway through. Derek was a hollow man, spending his days in silence, haunted not by the system that punished him, but by the memory of the woman he humiliated who never raised her voice against him. In contrast, Jamal Thompson's name became a beacon across the country. Police chiefs and mayors called for similar reforms. Universities invited him to speak on justice and leadership, but through it all, he remained grounded. When reporters praised him as America's most principled lawman, he always redirected the spotlight. "My mother taught me that justice isn't about applause. It's about persistence," he would say. A month later, the city of Baltimore held a community ceremony at the Inner Harbor to honor Evelyn Thompson. Hundreds gathered beneath the open sky, where a mural had been painted on the brick wall overlooking the water. A portrait of Evelyn, her expression calm, eyes filled with quiet strength. Beneath it, the words read, "Silence can be powerful, but truth must always speak." Jamal stood beside her as Mayor Rivera unveiled the mural. Applause filled the air. Reporters asked Evelyn what she felt seeing her face immortalized. She smiled gently. "I don't see myself," she said. "I see every mother who ever prayed her child would make it home safely." When it was Jamal's turn to speak, his voice carried emotion that years of professionalism had hidden. "My mother's silence changed a city," he began. "But silence alone doesn't build justice. Action does. We can't heal what we refuse to face. Today, Baltimore faced it." He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd, students, officers, activists, families. "Let this mural remind us that every act of cruelty reveals a choice, and every choice can lead to change." As the ceremony ended, Evelyn stood beside the mural, her hand resting gently against the painted surface. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving her with the sound of water rippling against the harbor wall. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Rest now, Samuel." Our boy kept his promise. That night, Jamal returned to his office one last time before leaving for Washington. The city outside glowed under streetlights, no longer burning with anger but glowing with cautious hope. Sarah Jenkins entered quietly. "You're leaving tomorrow?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "Baltimore's ready to stand on its own." She smiled. "You know, you didn't just expose corruption, you rebuilt trust." He looked out the window, his reflection merging with the city lights. "Maybe, but it took my mother's strength to remind me what justice looks like." As the clock struck midnight, Jamal gathered his files and turned off the lights. For the first time in months, the city felt calm. Justice, long denied, had finally found its way home. 3 months had passed since the verdict. and Baltimore was no longer the same city it had been that October morning. The streets still carried memories of protest chants and candlelight vigils. But now, there was a quiet resilience in the air, like a wound beginning to heal. Murals of Evelyn Thompson appeared across the city, each one capturing her calm strength, her silent defiance, and the dignity that had ignited a movement. The largest stood at Inner Harbor, where hundreds gathered every weekend to honor what her silence had started. Evelyn often visited quietly, her cane tapping gently against the pavement as she gazed at her own painted reflection. She didn't see fame. She saw a reminder of the pain that became purpose. On a cool afternoon in January, Jamal stood beside his mother at the mural's base as the city dedicated a plaque in her honor. Reporters surrounded them, microphones flashing, but he barely noticed. His focus was on her, frail yet proud, her eyes still burning with the same fire that guided him. "I never wanted this kind of attention," Evelyn whispered softly. "All I wanted was peace." Jamal smiled faintly. "You gave this city more than peace. Mama, you gave it its conscience." She chuckled quietly. "I only sat still. You're the one who made them mow." The mayor took the podium, her voice carrying over the harbor breeze. "Mrs. Thompson, your courage reminded this city what justice should look like. Not anger, not revenge, but accountability through truth. And to Director Jamal Thompson, who stood firm when it mattered most. You gave this city hope again." The crowd applauded, a long wave of clapping that rolled through the plaza like thunder. Evelyn bowed her head humbly. "If only your father could see this," Clara whispered beside her. Evelyn smiled wistfully. "He can, Clara. He always could." Nearby, Mia Rodriguez watched from the crowd, now wearing a press badge around her neck. The viral video she had filmed months earlier had changed her life. She'd been accepted into a journalism program, determined to tell stories that revealed truth rather than just shock. It all started with one recording. She told a reporter, but it became about something much bigger than me. It became about the power of seeing and refusing to look away. Jasmine Lee stood beside her, now an advocate for victims of police misconduct. Together with Dr. Marcus Hale, she launched the Justice Through Truth Fund, a program to provide legal aid and mental health support for families affected by systemic abuse. Evelyn's story taught us that justice isn't just punishment. Jasmine said at the launch event, "It's restoration." Their initiative quickly gained national attention, drawing donations and endorsements from across the country. Meanwhile, Sophia Thompson, now back in law school, led student protests for national police accountability laws. Her arrest during the Baltimore March had made her a symbol for youth activism. "I'm not my father's shadow," she said during an interview on CNN. "I'm his continuation." When Jamal saw that segment, he smiled quietly. "She's going to outdo me," he said to Sarah Jenkins during a late meeting at FBI headquarters. Sarah grinned. "That's the point. Sir, that's legacy." Derek Harlan's name had faded from the headlines, though his story became a cautionary tale in police ethics training nationwide. Behind bars, he wrote a letter to Evelyn, an apology filled with regret and shame. But Evelyn never read it. She told her son, "Some words aren't meant to be reopened. Forgiveness doesn't always need to be heard. It just needs to be lived." The letter was returned, unopened. Derek would later learn of Victor Klein's death in prison, a quiet end to a man who once ruled through fear. For the first time, Derek prayed for both of them. As for Jamal, the reforms he began in Baltimore spread far beyond the city. Within a year, 7 other states adopted versions of the Accountability Act, creating independent review boards and public complaint registries. News outlets called it the Thompson effect. But Jamal never saw it as his achievement. When asked how it felt to be credited with transforming national policy, he replied simply, "I only followed my mother's example. She faced hate with grace and silence with strength." On a mild spring evening, Jamal returned to the harbor alone. The water reflected the city lights like a mirror of memory. He looked up at the mural, his heart heavy but at peace. He thought of his father, whose death had been buried under lies, and his mother, whose quiet endurance brought those lies to light. He took a folded letter from his coat pocket, a speech he had written for her upcoming 69th birthday, and read it softly to the wind. "You taught me that justice isn't about power," he whispered. "It's about purpose. You reminded a nation that compassion can be louder than hate. And though the fight goes on, I know now we can win it with dignity." As he stood there, the sound of church bells echoed from the distance. A group of children played near the water, laughing as they pointed to the mural. One little girl asked her mother, "Who's that lady?" The woman smiled gently. "That's the woman who made the world listen." Evelyn would pass peacefully 6 months later, her hands folded over her favorite blue sweater. The city mourned, flags lowered to half-staff. Her funeral filled the same church where she had once organized civil rights meetings decades earlier. People came from every corner of the country, activists, students, even police officers, to pay their respects. As Jamal delivered her eulogy, his voice trembled. "My mother never wanted fame. She only wanted fairness. She lived quietly, but her silence changed everything." That evening, as dusk fell over Baltimore, the mural at Inner Harbor was lit with golden light. The city gathered once more, candles flickering beneath her portrait. Jamal looked out over the crowd, his voice steady as he gave his final tribute. "The world remembers the loud moments of history," he said, "but sometimes the loudest sound of all is silence." And as the crowd bowed their heads, the wind carried that silence through the streets, a silence not of fear, but of peace, strength, and the lasting legacy of a woman whose quiet grace changed a nation. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Together, we stand for justice and truth.